Well, we're very glad to have you all here today. My name is Beth Sanders, and I'm the Vice Chair of the Registrar's Committee, Western Region. And so no matter what time zone you're in, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We're so glad that you've joined us for this 11th webinar in our series, Hands-On Practical Conservation for the Collections Professional. We are so glad to keep bringing you these webinars. It's been fantastic month after month over the last year, and it's just been such a great opportunity to continue developing our skills in collections care through consultation with these conservation specialists that we have. We wouldn't be able to do it without the help of our sponsors. So we're going to thank today's sponsor is Artwork Fine Art Services. For nearly 30 years, Artwork Fine Art Services has served as the trusted logistics partner of some of America's most highly recognized and regarded museums, galleries, collectors, and artists. They specialize in expert handling and work passionately and painstakingly to customize unique and creative solutions for door-to-door domestic and international shipping, warehousing, and preservation of your artwork. With offices in Portland and Seattle, be sure to speak with them for your upcoming shipping, packing, storage, and installation needs. And a big thank you to Artwork Fine Art Services for being a Tier 1 sponsor of RCWR. If you're not a member of RCWR, let me take this moment to try to convince you to join today. RCWR represents collections professionals in our 9 Western states as the regional affiliate of the Collection Stewardship Group of AAM. In addition to this webinar series and in-person events at some point in the future when we can do so safely, we also send out our weekly job listing emails and a quarterly newsletter filled with great content. We have stipends to apply for conferences, both regional and national, and membership is only $15 a year. So join today at rcwr.org. A few quick Zoom logistics. You'll note this is a webinar format, so you can see us, but we can't see you. I hope that you're comfortable, but we are recording today's webinar. So if you miss something, don't feel like you have to jot down a million notes. We'll have this webinar recorded and posted on our RCWR YouTube page within a few days, and we'll also embed it into our website under the workshops tag, so rcwr.org. You'll click on workshops and you'll scroll down to past events. Great to see people using the chat, and if you have comments throughout the presentation or want to say anything to any of your fellow attendees or the panelists, feel free to put them there. But if you do note, there's also the Q&A feature in Zoom if you haven't used it before. We'd ask that you put your questions for our panelists, for our speaker today, in there, and that way they all just stay together and we can ask them all to Meg at the end of the presentation. Speaking of, today we are very fortunate to have Meg Geiss-Mooney here with us. Meg is a conservator in private practice specializing in fiber-based media, and she's been based in Northern California since 1979. She's a professional associate of the American Institute for Conservation and has served in a variety of capacities for the AIC Textiles Specialty Group and the Costume Society of America. Meg provides a full range of services, including assessments, treatments, integrated pest management, disaster preparedness and response, preparation of custom supports, hangers and boxes for storage, display, and loan, as well as different types of training on-site and items like this online for collections managers and conservators. So her past on-site work ranged from both conventional museums to some really interesting different locations like scout huts, cruise ships, and I'm really interested to know about the winery experience, regionally and internationally. So we're very grateful to have Meg here joining us today. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to her.
Great. Thank you so much, Beth. I'm hoping everybody can hear me. Let me click the button here and we'll get going. All right. Does everybody see that all right? All right. Today I acknowledge that the land I'm residing on is the ancestral homelands of the Coast Miwok people. I would like to express gratitude and appreciation to those who stewarded this land. I pay my respects to the past, present, and emerging elders and citizens of the community of the Coast Miwok and the Federated Indians of the Great Naracharia, formerly known as the Federated Coast Miwok. As Beth mentioned, this webinar is being recorded, and I'm really glad it is, because an hour is not nearly enough time to go over everything that's possible in terms of storing 3D costume. And so all I can do is provide some information and some hopefully helpful tips. And then it's, is it costume? Singular, plural? Is it dress? Is it fashion? Should they be called artifacts or objects? Well, for today's presentation, I am just going to use costume both as the singular and the plural, just cut to the chase. I also want to thank the Tier 1 sponsor, Artwork Fine Art Services, for supporting this webinar. It's very appreciated. So let's get started. Now we come to, am I going to figure out how to advance my slides or not? That's always the fun part. Oh, also, I wanted to give you a heads up that I have both birds and a dog and a husband in the same space that I'm giving the webinar. So hopefully there won't be too much noise pollution from any of those, but I just wanted to give you the heads up in that regard. All right, there we go. So we must remember that we are preserving people and costume and the affiliated supports, such as padding and boxes and hangers, dust covers, inner lining, etc. Of course, people should be number one. And so I'll also talk a little bit about some protective things. There'll be a reference list, and on that reference list is a wonderful publication that I highly recommend to everybody called Health and Safety for Museum Professionals, that was published, revised by Spinach, the Society for the Preservation of Natural History Costumes. It is an encyclopedic reference book that everybody should have on their shelves. So what's affiliated supplies? That's basically what an affiliated supply is made from. So that's the media. So that's things like paper mat board, wood, chrome metal, polypropylene, cotton, silk, things like that. And then the format is it applied board, a corrugated board? Is it a box shape, a dust cover, or a hanger shape? And so it basically, here's the things that I'm sort of have my area of expertise, experience, and academic background in. So today, because of course costume can be both sort of two-dimensional and three-dimensional structurally, we're going to sort of focus in on the 3D shape. This is cut and tailored fabric. It's been shaped, multiple layers, front and back. And they range in complexity from just literally a single layer of fabric to multiple layers of fabric, or multiple layers with different media and non-textile media. And we have to let the actual condition of the costume itself guide you. It's really difficult to make hard and fast generalizations for all military jackets, for all christening gowns. You know, you could have in storage a row of identical men's World War II military jackets. However, 3 or 4 were never worn. 2 were on display for 20 years time in open space, uncovered. 6 were worn and never cleaned. 8 more were worn by multiple people and cleaned by multiple different dry cleaning solvents over the decades. So all of these experiences change the physical and visual condition of each of these costumes. You also have to keep the weakest link in mind for each costume. And there might be more than one, unfortunately. Also, that weakest link might not be a textile or fiber component. We also have to look at the realities of the institution and the building and the spaces within that, in those buildings or singular building. Are the doors wide enough to move boxes without tilting, to get a cart through? Are the hallways wide enough to move a dress mannequin or a cart that's filled with hanging costume? Is there an elevator present to move between floors? Will the boxes and the carts in the racks fit in the elevator? Do you have to share it with the public? If you don't have an elevator and you have to move costume between floors, are the staircases and the landings wide enough? Then we have the realities of the staff. You know, who is handling and moving the costume? Are there enough people? What are the physical abilities of those individual people? Can they carry safely large and or heavy boxes or costume on hangers, especially up and down stairs? All right. Also, disaster preparedness must also guide your choices for the chosen media and formats. As this past couple of years between wildfires and evacuations and flooding, both through natural Mother Nature, climate change, more than ever, we have to start thinking what would happen in a disaster if we use these particular media and format. We also must remember that nothing is forever. We have improvement and breakthroughs. We have an ongoing and upgrading and replacing. Yes, I said the word replacing of affiliated supplies. Just because you bought that box, a batch of archival boxes 20 years ago, you need to start budgeting to replace those boxes. They're definitely at the end of their appropriate life, no matter what they're made out of or what was inside of them. They too are deteriorating. We also learn from our experiences, our mistakes, and research that's ongoing, both in the conservation field and other fields that are related to the industries that create the media and the materials that we use. And the good news is we all have media and materials coming onto the market and becoming available easily and affordably. When I got into the field of conservation in private practice, way back when in the Stone Ages, you couldn't buy a package of acid-free tissue, buffered or unbuffered, without having to buy what would seem to be a boxcar load. Now you can get it via Amazon for just 100 sheets at a time in different sizes or a roll. So that's, and it's, you don't have to rob a bank to buy it either. So that's wonderful. And as I've already mentioned, the sources of deterioration also affect the components of the building and the affiliated supplies we use for the storage in the storage of costume. Of course, we will not be addressing the components of the building today, as we do not have time by any stretch of the imagination. Also, we have something that I always mention, which is ideal versus reality. It's constantly doing a balancing act at all times. So what are we battling here? So here's a brief list of the sources of deterioration for costume and affiliated supplies. And you can see them, I've briefly summarized them here, and we'll go through these briefly in regards to costume storage. And of course, there is synergy among these sources of deterioration. We're talking basic chemistry and physics here, folks. We can't stop the deterioration. We can either speed it up by inappropriate choices, or we can slow it down by making better choices. And of course, that's our goal, is to slow it down. So We can only change the effects of inherent vice by our choice for affiliated supplies used to store costume. We have to consider what situation is possible in the environment of this building space. It's a combination. Once again, there's synergy between the building, the costume, the affiliated supplies, the staff. And so here's a variety of different questions that we need to sort of get answers to in terms of when we're making our decisions about choices for media and format. So to bring it back a little bit to the costume itself, here's just two examples of inherent vice in costume. And here we have a combination of a metal button on a wool uniform, and the sulfur that's off-gassing from the deteriorating wool of that military jacket is causing corrosion from that button. And the button's getting back at that wool by leaving those corrosion products on the wool fabric itself. We also have a situation here where we have a loosely woven fabric that is slipping out of its sewn seam, causing more damage. So the next one is physical and mechanical stress. And already you can sort of see that there's some synergy between that inherent vice with the picture of the slipping loosely woven fabric, because as that continues to slip, we have more physical and mechanical stress on that seam. In terms of costume, it's the effect of gravity and the flexing and folding when something is stored. If it's stored in a box that's too small, their folds and creases get created. Physical and mechanical stress also gets worse when the relative humidity is not controlled and rises. 1 gallon of water weighs about 8 pounds. And you notice that all of a sudden, if you've got relative humidity and problems, and all of a sudden your costume weighs a lot more because of the water content, that's going to cause more physical and mechanical stress on that costume. Also, when it comes to physical and mechanical stress, if the costume itself also has dangling parts and components that aren't supported while being moved or being packed, you can just have them tear loose or get caught on something. So here's an example of mechanical and physical stress in a costume. You can see that as the physical condition is deteriorated, the gravity has worked its wiles on that shoulder and is starting to tear loose. In a disaster, or with the higher humidity, in that extra weight, I would expect that sleeve to tear loose much more quickly. And we've all seen folds pressed into costume when it's been stored in a small box or folded too many times to fit into the box. There's also a synergy with this in this picture with the use of bubble wrap and a wood hanger. We also have to look at how the possible affiliated supplies are going to deal with light in the environment of the building. How do they mitigate the exposure to light or not? Is it a clear box? Are there no shrouds put on costume out on display or when laid out on a table during the accession process or the packing process? Here's a couple of little reminders from the conservator here about that it's all wavelengths of light we have to worry about, because all wavelengths of light are absorbed by the media, not just the ultraviolet end of the spectrum. We also have to worry about the other end of the spectrum, which is the infrared spectrum, because that energy is absorbed as heat energy. So all of a sudden, that brings up another synergy, is that, the light is interacting with that temperature and relative humidity deterioration factor. You also must remember that light exposure is both cumulative and not reversible. There's no such thing as having a costume rest in the dark in storage that will somehow put together broken molecular bonds or restores its color. That is a myth. So here's just some examples of light exposure in costume. We have Mr. Calrissian's cape here, who has, while it's been on display, has faded differentially because of the folds of the cape. An ecclesiastical vestment on the right has a flap that if you lift it up, you can see what the original color actually looked like. All irreversible. So then we have to also move on to the high temperature and relative humidity. Does the media or format fail at higher temperatures, more than 75 degrees over time or not? Does the media absorb moisture when the relative humidity? Chemical reactions speed up as the temperature increases and slow down when the temperature decreases. So we want to keep things as stable as possible. Also, we have things that happen with metal fasteners corroding and rusting when the relative humidity is too high. And so this gets some interacts with, overlaps with this mechanical and physical stress and contamination. Here's also corrosion on different kinds of safety pins. You can see once again that there's synergy with physical and mechanical stress and contamination with this corrosion product, and the damage caused here as the safety pin is moved in within the fabric, it has caused tears. We also have, as you can already see from my previous slides, that contamination is quite different in all its possibilities. We also have, dust accumulations. Is it not filtered out by your HVAC system? Does your HVAC system even have a particulate debris filter installed? Is it changed periodically? We have the wood acids of acetic, formic, and nitric acids and formaldehyde that transfer when in direct contact with the media of costume and affiliated supplies. Here's some other examples of contamination in costumes and mold and mildew activity. Everything we are currently completely surrounded and enveloped in mold and mildew spores. All they're doing is waiting for the proper environment for them to go into their growth cycle, and away they go. You must wear the proper PPE if you suspect mold and mildew contamination. If it's active mold or mildew, it's easily moved or smeared when you touch it with a blunt spatula or a Q-tip. And here's some synergy in the poor underarm area of this costume. And here's an example of contamination from an enfiladed supply, a padded hanger. We've got mold and mildew activity and contamination coming from this old dry cleaner's hanger, unsealed wood, acidic pH surface, interacting with the high temperature and relative humidity. This particular batting underneath was actual cotton batting, and it was positively soggy, and so it acts like a sponge. Must be avoided if your situation in your building is uncontrolled relative humidity. And since it's relative humidity is tied to temperature, if your temperature is not well controlled, your relative humidity also cannot be well controlled. Here's another example of contamination in an affiliated supply. This is a coroplast box where the flutes are open. And we literally have a webbing clothes moth adult that has crawled into up the flute. We also have affiliated supplies that are literally have inherent vice problems of their own, where they're sold, where there are literally openings in the box and lid structure. This is the bottom edge of the box that I've not only can dust and insects and water get in through these holes. This must be mitigated or a different choice made in terms of storage structure. All right, so now that everybody's all depressed, let's move on to some of my tips. Are these media and formats stable over time and durable, both physically and chemically in the environment of the spaces the costume is going to be in over time and in a disaster? So let's make some better choices about the media when you're storing costume. Use a metal hangers instead of wood. Avoid the use of plastic hangers. Mitigate the wood surfaces if you have to use wood hangers. And you can do that by using heavy-duty aluminum foil used to enclose wood hangers, folding over the edges of the foil and smoothing it down before patting out the hanger and putting the outer cover on. Okay. The hanger should be custom made for each costume and not a one-size-fits-all in batches. I recommend the use of fabric instead of paper-based tissue for padding out and lifting slings. And let's see, let me put that down there. Great, all right. The fabric can be yardage or bed sheets. 100% cotton if your environment is appropriate and stable temperature and relative humidity wise. Otherwise, use 60-40 cotton polyester blend fabric instead. Silk habitat is recommended if you're storing, padding out and separating layers of brittle and fragile costume. Also, the nice thing about fabric is it's easy to get pieces that are large enough for use without having to piece. Fabric is also longer lived and can be reused versus paper-based tissue. Very importantly, it does not revert to paper pulp in a waterlogged disaster. It is also generally more opaque to light than paper-based tissues. It's also important to use, provide some protection and use fabric as a possibility to place barriers between buttons and the sleeve. As I recall, I think it was the last webinar we had, and once it, I highly recommend all the previous webinars in this series, where the conservator talked about placing a barrier between the back of the button and the leather surfaces. And it's true also with fabric surfaces, both because of the media and also because of the format. You can see with this particular button, that's a very, it's actually pronged. The rhinestones and pearls are in a pronged fixture, just waiting to try to snag either the ribbon embroidery or the skirt satin fabric. The fabric should be pre-shrunk and rinsed before use, and you need excellent water quality of the rinsed water. Otherwise, you're just contaminating your fabric with whatever's in the water. And a washing machine free of residue. Once again, otherwise the residue is just deposited on your fabric that's going to be in intimate contact with your costume. To create a soft edge, just unravel the edges on all four sides, 5 or 6 warps or less, to give you a nice little soft fringe. You can also cut the fabric corners on an angle. It's just a little nip off the corner to make it easier to unravel. I recommend that you use a lifting sling made out of fabric in one piece. First put into the box, and then the costume pieces go in. It turns that fabric or polyester batting is not firm enough for padding out, because the costume would flatten it because of its weight, or to roll up a tie or an attached belt. Create a core of crumpled aluminum, heavy-duty aluminum aluminum foil. You can also use rolled 100% polyester felt or densified polyester pad for cores. The pool noodles also can be used for cores, but are more heat sensitive in a fire situation. These core media do not absorb water or moisture, and so don't get heavy in high RH environments and in disasters, and don't support mold or mildew growth and are not food for pests. All the prepared cores are then covered with a piece of fabric that extends about 1 inch beyond the ends of the core. So here's just a quick, some images, and here's the, the crumpled core. And these can be made small enough that you can use them to pad out the fingers in a glove. If it's a fragile glove media, you can use silk as the wrapping fabric. And here it's placed, and you can actually sort of see the raveled edge here. And then here we have actually 6 here in the shoulders. The attached belt is rolled up on it, and then the skirt is folded over so it doesn't crease when it's in the box. And here's a little information about this densified polyester pad. And it's like somebody is like I don't know if you can see in I've got it here. It's like they took polyester batting and just compressed it, and it's heat sealed, so it's very firm, still resilient, but it's much more resilient than just plain polyester batting like Firmament quilt. The other nice thing about using an aluminum core is that you can actually bend it to the shape of the shoulder, or whatever you need. I warn you against the use of plastic tubular hangers because they fail over time when there's too much weight put on them. And they lose the battle against gravity. And as you can see, right here, whoop, I don't know if I'll be able to go back. Nope, I can't. Let's see here if I can go back. Nope. Hey, there we go. There we go. You can see if the hanging rod was right here, you can see this green one is literally 2 seconds from falling off that hanging rod. Also, in a disaster involving fire, the polypropylene plastic that makes up these tubular hangers is much more heat sensitive and will fail much more quickly than metal hangers or wood hangers with metal hooks. So trying to other tips here. Remember that box with all those inherent vise holes? Well, you cover those outside, on the outside of those boxes, the holes and the corrugations that have those holes in them, and the corrugated board, using archival type Tyvek tape, and burnish it down with a blunt edge. The hanger silhouette should match the silhouette of the costume in the shoulder area. This can be tricky to find in pre-20th century costume, but if you can look around, one of those things that you don't have to just go with the archival product companies. There's a whole bunch of clothes hanger bit companies and display companies that make it. Also, there's IKEA. It's just one of those things you just have to keep your eyeballs peeled. Ideally, each costume on hanger will have its own dust cover or shroud, which is enclosed at both the top and the bottom, with the seam allowances on the outside. This shroud will help with an easy ID because this shroud will have will be labeled with the accession number or the ID number or the name on an outside edge where it's easily seen, and you don't have to go pawing through the costume trying to find that accession number stitched to inside at the center back neck. The other recommendation for using shrouds is that it protects the costume from each other when they're stored on a rack or in a storage cabinet, and catches components that fall off and evidence of pest activity, and provides protection immediately from light and dust debris when they're removed from the storage cabinet. Here's a source of where you can get that Tyvek tape. As you can see, it comes in 3 different widths, very affordable. Here's a no-sew custom shroud, and I just realized, oh my goodness, look how that's very blurry. My apologies for that. Basically, it's almost sort of like it's just a sling, and you can sort of see I'll have to redo that because that's definitely not very legible. But you can sort of make out the premises of it here. And this works really well with costume that have squared off shoulders, such as military jackets and suit jackets, and things that in costume that are on with sort of squarish silhouette hangers, things like skirts and pants. So let's talk a little bit about protecting you. This is the most important part of my message, I think, today. Is the costume emitting weird smells when you open the trunk or the box or the cabinet? Is it a mothball, a mold or mildew, cigarette, musty? Are these confirmed or suspected mold, mildew, fungi activity? Confirmed or suspected rodent or avian activity? And in disaster recovery and salvage work, at least breathing protection, at least N95 or N100. Remember to keep them stored in a plastic bag. The good news is that N95s and N100s are starting to become more available again. It was really tough this past 18 months to find those for collections care situations. If you're going to be doing a lot of disaster recovery or salvage work, or if you've got a lot of costume with these weird problems, dangerous problems, health-related problems for you, consider getting a half-face respirator, which means you have to be assessed and fit tested for this, which means getting your health care provider involved to approve your use of those. Nitrile gloves, powderless nitrile gloves at all times, and changed in between each costume, please. Don't reuse them, throw them away. Cotton knit gloves can't protect you from these contaminations. And then take them off properly. And then goggles that strap onto your head over your eyeglasses and your eyes to protect your eyes. So how do you take off nitrile gloves properly? Well, here's a little demonstration here. I won't go through it. Unfortunately, if we were doing this live and in person, everybody would have a couple of pairs of nitrile gloves, and we would practice until you can do it right, because we don't want to contaminate yourself by when you're trying to remove your contaminated gloves. This way of taking them off encloses that contamination inside the gloves. Also, disposable coverall or lab coat to protect your clothes, and it's removed when you're done working with the costume and bagged separately to be thrown away. And once again, changed every day if you're doing a lot of this. If you're going to have to crawl around on the floor, let me tell you, polyethylene foam knee pads are wonderful, easily obtained at the hardware store. So finishing up here. As the conservator, I've got to say it at least once, an ounce of prevention is a pound of cure. Why are we going through this trouble and bother and the expense of money and staff time? Because it's an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. We've got that reality of the number of costume combined with the reality of the building, the reality of the staffing, and the reality of the budget. Where to start in the face of this reality? Well, may I suggest that you start with a costume that's deemed iconic or a pilgrimage piece for your institution. Perhaps it can be then written up and get more interest in helping taking care of and improving the costume storage. Consider applying for a grant for the Collections Assessment for Preservation, or otherwise known as the CAP program. And what's fun is that the next deadline is next week, which is really too soon. But fortunately, this program usually accepts applications every year. And this is a wonderful beginning step because you can then take this assessment includes both the building and the collections, and is used as a stepping stone for grants and further funding possibilities. Also considering applying for a grant, the Small Museum Collections Care Grant Program that's available through the Costume Society of America. $1,500 isn't a whole lot of money sometimes, but sometimes it'll definitely get you started in a project. This deadline is October 15th, but the program does accept applications every year. And some years we're fortunate enough to be able to give 2 grants. And it's definitely aimed at tiny to small museums. And then once again, I've got to talk up the Collection Services Initiative project that RCWR does, the CSI project. So you can obtain a professional advice and hands-on professional volunteers for a particular project. So thank you for spending your time with us today. Are there any questions, Beth? Please do not hesitate to contact me with further questions. I like to say that taking care of our collections is not rocket science. A lot of it is common sense, and I'm happy to help in any way I can.
Thank you so much, Meg. We do have the first question coming in, but please put your questions in the Q&A. Oh, now there's more coming that I said it.
Oh.
Our first question is from Linda, who asks if you have a recommendation for transporting large textiles from collection storage to exhibit. These are textiles that are stored flat in very large textile cabinets and are displayed flat, but they don't want to fold or roll some of the fragile ones during transport. And Linda notes that the transport is within the same building.
But is it on the same floor? Hopefully, here we are where we have the reality of the building. Ideal is actually removing the drawer that they're in the storage cabinet where they're flat and transporting that drawer or tray, hopefully on carts of some specifically designed, or hand carried if not. And the question then gets to, are the doorways wide enough to carry out, and the hallways wide enough to carry out this tray via cart or hand carry from the storage space to the exhibit area?
Clearly, there's a lot of variables to consider. We have a question about if it's okay to fold a costume into half with a noodle along the fold line if they cannot find boxes big enough to accommodate the whole thing.
I get to say the other favorite phrase of a conservator, it all depends. Sometimes I recommend that if you don't have boxes that are big enough, to consider hanging the costume. This, of course, is a whole nother webinar in terms of doing hanging costume for three-dimensional textiles. We'll talk, Beth, about future webinars. It's possible to fold it in half. If it's a large pool noodle, you want to have that pool noodle wrapped in fabric first, so the plastic surface is not against the in direct intimate contact with the fabric and the components of the costume. If you do that, you're not allowed to put any other costume on top of it. So no lasagna layering of costume in the storage box. Also, it's might be possible to not fold it in half, but consider doing 2/3 and 1/3. It's my recommendation, if possible, is to use up as much of the box space as possible, and then do the folding over of just the stuff, just the parts of the costume that won't lay flat.
Regarding hangers, you said metal is best, but wouldn't they also be subject to bending from heavier weights like the plastic ones do?
I'm not talking about wire hangers, as in the wire hangers you get from the dry cleaner. I'm talking about wire hangers made from metal that are almost tubular. I just realized that I should have brought out a wire hanger to show you. But yeah, there are wire hangers that are available easily from a variety of sources that are much thicker wire. And actually, for really heavy costume, you can actually double up these thicker wire chromed hangers. I've actually also seen aluminum, thick aluminum rod. Yeah, so that's like their rod, that's metal rod that's been bent into hanger shape versus a wire, is my recommendation.
And will an example or a possible resource for those types of hangers be put in our reference list that we'll be sending out tomorrow?
Yeah.
But how many times would you reuse the same fabric? Would you replace it on a schedule or only if damage is seen? Would you use
I would do it on a schedule. It's also once again, I get to say it again, it all depends. If you've got a really stinky, it's reeking of mothballs or cigarettes or whatever, or it's actively falling apart, or there's been past insect activity, you need to inspect more frequently. And so it's basically the ones that you've had problems with in the past, either because of contamination or insect activity or rodent, you are going to want to inspect and swap out or reuse after rinsing the fabric. And then the costume, who are on good behavior, it would be, every couple of years.
Is it safe to store large, heavy beaded costumes in baked enamel drawers? Or do you have a source recommended for textile storage drawers?
Baked enamel. So it's baked enamel over metal. Yes, I would say so, especially because my recommendation is that you're going to want a lifting sling underneath. So you have the baked enamel surface, and then you're going to have that piece of fabric or a lifting board. And then you're going to have the costume on top of that fabric or that lifting board. So yes.
If you live in an area where you don't have access to the best, cleanest water for washing. Is there any recommended pre-washed and shrunk fabric you'd recommend?
Yes, we're very lucky in that it's called Prepared for Dyeing. And this is the one of the ones that actually goes after the museum and collections care industries, called Test Fabrics, all one word. And it's fabric that has already been pre-rinsed, because people think you're going to be dyeing or doing some kind of textile testing. And so that's available both through Test Fabrics as a textile testing manufacturer and supply industry, as well as businesses that cater to the make generation, like Dharma Trading, and and I just spaced on the other one that just, I think, Pro Chemical. It's sort of the I don't want to call them amateurs, because they're fabulous dyers, people who are dyeing their own fabrics and pieces of costume, all those wonderful tie dyers. But that industry and those businesses that cater to that marketing niche have prepared for dyeing in a variety of weaves and fiber content and knits and all that. I want to caution you not to use linen because of its lignin content. And so it has an inherent vice problem that it becomes very acidic all by itself. And we don't want, we want to make a better choice for fiber. So cotton, polyester, silk are the fibers that I recommend that are going to be in close, intimate contact with costume.
Do you have any recommendations for storage and preservation of costumes with rubber or neoprene, which are disintegrating on their own?
Yes, talk about inherent vice and contamination coming together in a big headache. It's, once again, this is where you have to go back to that reality of your building and your space. The ideal versus the reality is that things that have neoprene and rubber are going to be stored together. They're not going to be intermixed with the rest of the collection that doesn't have rubber and neoprene. There's still ongoing research as to whether it's best to try to have some kind of a scavenger inside a very well-sealed container to absorb this off-gassing that's occurring, or whether or not air circulation and dilution is better in terms of the health and slowing down the rate of deterioration and off-gassing of this neoprene and rubber. So I can't give you a definitive answer. There are definitely possibilities, but one of the things I can recommend is storing neoprene and rubber containing together and not in the general population.
That was my own personal one, since we rubber.
Oh yeah,
that's also been in salt water. So
there you go.
Lots of inherent vices. Well, it seems that we have gotten through the questions. So if nobody else has any more questions, I will switch it back to my screen. If you have a last question, put it in now while I do that. Hopefully you can see my screen now. So I wanted to just thank Meg and all of you for joining us today and asking questions and being part of this great series we've been able to bring to you. Before I go, I wanted to let you know that we won't be having one of these hands-on webinars next month, because October is the month of our RCWR annual meeting. So for our members who are in attendance today, what Meg mentioned with our CSI, our Collections Stewardship Initiative, we are going to be sending out the information for registration tomorrow. So we'll be helping out the Gresham Historical Society, which was a victim to an arson incident this past July. And so we'll be working virtually again based on the current situation in the world. We hope that we'll be able to schedule it in affiliation with the Western Museums Association meeting again in the future, but we'll have another great event this year. So watch your inbox for that. And if you haven't already signed up for the following day, Wednesday, October 6th, we'll have our RCWR annual meeting. And we'll be not only recapping all the great things we've done this year, but we'll be announcing the results of our election and introducing our new board. So mark your calendars for those two events for our members. And then for everyone who's here today, our next hands-on webinar will be on Thursday, November 18th. We'll have Samantha Springer back with us talking about identifying and basic cleaning of different ceramic types. So Samantha spoke last November about condition surveys in a great webinar. So we're excited to have her back, and we hope you'll be able to join us for that. We'll definitely send out information and get the registration for that going shortly. So watch your inboxes, Facebook, and all the usual places for information on that. With that, I'm just going to put mine and Meg's contact information back up here on the screen. As Meg mentioned, she's happy to answer other questions. So you have her email there if you want to get back in touch with her. But if you have other questions about RCWR generally or this webinar series, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, rcwrvicechair@gmail.com. We are always looking for different ideas of programming we could bring. So please do reach out. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting for today. And we hope that we will see all of our members at our events in October and the rest of you at our next webinar in November.